Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Star Citizen Live, all about Alpha 3.10. I'm your host, Jared Huckabee, and joining us on the show this week are two folks who perhaps need no introduction, but as always, we're going to do it anyway. We've got Star Citizen Live Game Director, Mr. Todd Papy. Todd, how you doing?
Hello. Good.
And we've got Vehicle Director, Mr. John Crewe. John, how you doing?
Hello.
Welcome, guys, to the show. Now, every quarter we do one of these shows. It's our all about the patch show. Questions today will be focused entirely on the contents of 3.10, which is currently available on PTU, working its way towards a live release, hopefully sooner rather than later. I've got no information on dates or anything like that. So Todd, for Star Citizen, what do you do for Star Citizen for the folks who've never watched the show before?
I am basically a pillar director, which means that I work with feature teams, and then I also focus on the live release and making sure that it goes out as smoothly as it possibly can.
Okay. And John, Mr. Spaceship, what do you do for Star Citizen?
It's pretty much the same thing. Also a pillar director, just better look after all the vehicle stuff, so the 5 vehicle teams, so all the vehicle features and content, and try and make Todd happy with all the features going into the live release.
Yes.
All right. So, sorry for your new nickname, Mr. Spaceship. I didn't intend that. All right, so we're gonna jump right into it. Now, we take questions from 2 places during the course of a Star Citizen Live. If you're watching us live on Twitch right now, you can submit your question with the word "question" in capital letters surrounded by brackets into the Twitch chat. Our community management folks will pull it out of chat and start sending them to me. You can also do so on the RobertSpaceIndustries.com website in our Spectrum chat and Spectrum General chat. Additionally, we put up a thread earlier in the week where we started collecting questions from the community, allowed them to vote up which ones they wanted to see answered most. We pulled the ones that were actually relevant to Alpha 310 for the show, and we'll get started with those while the ones from live come in. John, right off the bat, why is flying in atmosphere now slower than Cold War jet aircraft? And I'm going to amend this. Is it? And if it actually is, why?
Well, so our ships fly in atmosphere, they fly in space, so you can't really directly compare them to Cold War jets, which just fly in atmosphere. They don't have to worry about going to space. So we were talking about this the other day, and our ships are much larger than they appear to be. They're much larger than modern day fighter jets. They're much heavier. They're often 4 to 5 times heavier than a fighter jet. So they aren't designed to be super fast in atmosphere. Ultimately, we'll make them go whatever speed makes sense for the game. And I'm not going to put an exact speed on that because there is just a huge variety of scenarios. All the planets have different gravity, different atmosphere. It varies like real life depending on how close you are to sea level. You go faster the higher you are in atmosphere. So as to why are they slower than a Cold War jet, I would say maybe they are in some scenarios, but they're also not in the other. I went and dug out some stats. So the Gladius in 310 PTU, not using afterburner, goes at 450 meters a second roughly at sort of maximum speed before you need to actively do any injection of pace, which is about 1,600 kilometers an hour. So yes, that is slower than a Cold War jet flying at altitude, but that's it flying as low on Daymar as I could dare go. I then took it up to 5,000 meters, and it was going 900 odd meters a second, which is 3.3 thousand kilometers an hour, which is much faster than a Cold War jet. So,
Gotcha. So you're saying that similar to actual aircraft, then the speed changes at the height at which you're flying.
It's completely driven by the atmospherics.
Gotcha.
If you go low to the ground, it's going to be slower than if you go a few thousand meters up, just like real-world aircraft.
Right.
If you want to grab hold of a Tomcat and go full Top Gun 1 meter off the deck, I'm not sure you'll get the flight stats for that speed.
Yeah. So and there's also there's the atmospheric things, and then there's also the weather effects. You know, whatever the weather is like at the time that you're flying will impact the speed and stuff like that. You know, the SR-71 didn't break speed records flying 100 meters over the ground. It did it as high up in the atmosphere as it could. So faster the higher you go up, slower the lower you go. So,
Yeah, and it's always something we're looking at. Like if there's one ship that's clearly well outside of what feels right, then there could be a bug there, and we'll look at it.
Right. Let's go ahead and reiterate that point, because that point's going to apply to almost every answer we give today, and that is it is currently in PTU. It is testing. We are getting feedback. We are making adjustments as we deem them necessary. Even when it goes live, our live environment is still an alpha testing environment, so it is still ripe for feedback, and we'll interpret that feedback, and what is valid and we agree with, we'll make changes. What isn't, we won't. So like that. So it is. The answers that you see here today, the patch that you're playing today on PTU and stuff, it is not the final iteration of anything. And that applies to everything that we're going to talk about today. So, all right, so moving on. Todd, in the new 310 delivery missions are a great idea now, but they're also 3 times the work for the same or even less reward. What was the reason for this change?
Well, we're changing the way that the actual missions work and making them more modularized, so we can actually scale them and be able to plop them into different locations very, very quickly. And then also just adjusting them so that we've got missions that are local based versus interplanetary or interstellar. So with that, we look at the overall time that it takes a player to complete it, and then we also have a rough idea of hey, we want the average player to be earning around this much per hour. So when we go through and review it, we do constant adjustments to the rewards and how much are paid out. And basically, we do a lot of that tuning when we're actually in wave 2, wave 3, and wave 4. So I fully expect us to still be looking at the payouts and adjusting them as we go before we go live.
And then, of course, as the economy continues to develop, as more gameplay systems come online and the ecosystem grows bigger, there may be continuing changes in future.
I can guarantee that there will always be changes. And then the other aspect that we'll look into it is basically how much risk reward, are there any other modifiers that we added to it? Are you delivering plutonium versus you're delivering a pizza? That should have different rewards, but it would be the same kind of basic gameplay, taking something from A to B.
Okay. Let's talk splines. For some, splines they're all WAPO at the moment.
Yeah.
Are splines currently working as we intended? Right now, it's hard to find them when we leave hangars, and when landing can seem very oppressive and often lead to death. What adjustments, if any, are we considering?
So I don't know when the thread went up, but certainly at the point that went up, it was in a much worse state than it is with the latest PTU patch. Between then and now, we've done some improvements to it. So the actual visuals of presuming we're talking about the restricted area.
The landing splines, I think, yeah.
That the gate visuals clamp to a minimum size on screen when they're rendered, so you can see them at further distance. The actual tolerances on them are double what they were. And also the landing icon for your designated landing pad no longer displays immediately. It displays at the start of the tunnel. So you're not tricked into going direct to the landing pad versus going through the tunnel. Then we breadcrumb you through the tunnel with the icons, then give you the landing pad icon. And it's the same now in reverse. So when you call ATC to get out the hangar, you have an icon with the off-screen indication that's at the start of the tunnel to guide you back out. Because there was a lot of usability there that wasn't quite right in the first release of it.
Which is, again, this is precisely why we have PTU and stuff to begin with. All right, so so lots of improvements to landing splines that have already happened over this week. The next question, splines could also be helpful on space stations, if only to find the path to your landing pad, docking bay, or some of the darker places like Grimhex, where it now has 2 sides and it's not so obvious from the arrow which one you're assigned. Is this something we would consider? Do we have a plan for this?
It's something we have considered. Basically, the way that the restricted zones work, though, is that you've got kind of a no-fly zone, and then you've got a zone that's underneath there that's basically a safe zone, and that spline is connecting those two, or letting you travel safely through that passage. So I think no matter what, we need to look at our markers and the way that we identify and lead players around, the space stations. So this is one way of doing it. But the way that, in GrimHacks, for example, I think we got like 9 or 10 hangars that are right next to each other. And so, if we did a spline there, it would be just a spline saying, okay, you need to fly over to this one, over to here, and then make your way in. But that really only works from a certain angle, so it's something that we've talked about, we're evaluating. I think it works better on ships, which John can talk about, but from a location standpoint, I think we need to do a better job in, saying, for example, like with Area 18, right now we have the marker that says Area 18, but we should have a marker that says Area 18 spaceport, and that's where you actually need to go. So I think us fixing those fundamental problems would actually allow it so that we don't need this extra hand holding, for the player.
One of the principal components of these new landing splines, besides the visual, the corridor, and everything, is also the autopilot. How's that working right now? Some folks are having a better experience with it than others at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the issue that we have right now is the way that we have 2 landing zones that are fully enclosed, and then we've got 2 major landing zones that are open. And one of the ones that is open is Area 18, and the spaceport is very far away from where the city is. The other one is Lorville, and the spaceport is right in the middle of the city. So we're discussing, do we move the hangars? Do we adjust the landing zone, or do we adjust the restricted zones completely, to actually get rid of the autopilot? These are all things that are in discussion right now, and we just need to evaluate what works best for the game. So, but it's something that's on Chris's mind, it's on John's mind, it's on mine, as well as the team's.
As a follow-up to that from the chat, landing in the horizontal hangars is a real challenge. Was a real challenge with the new 3.10 flight model. The Carrack was tight in 3.9, but it got more difficult with the changes to 3.10. How will this be addressed?
So there's definitely a bug at the moment in that the wind is in the hangars when it should not be in the hangars. So the Carrack is a tight fit. We made it as small as we could. We've talked about this lots in previous shows about the problems of all the things that are supposed to go in the Carrack versus the size of the Carrack. If we made the Carrack bigger, then it can only land in the huge hangars, and you can't spawn it everywhere, which is sort of not good for a exploration ship. So we crunched it down as much as we could to keep the true intent of the ship, which means it is a tight fit. It fits in our metrics. The hangars are to metric. So when you have a bug like there being the winds inside, it can cause havoc with that. So that's a big problem there that we need to fix, and also just be very, very slow and careful taking it out.
Okay. Do we think the wind thing might be fixed for 3.10, or is this something that might persist for a little bit and we need to do we have any hope for this?
I don't know. It's logged and there's people looking at it.
All right. Well, let's see. The new Moby Glass 2.0 comes in a lot of cool colors. Are there any ways those colors are there any ways we can get those colors to also correlate to the text and the graphics in the Moby Glass screens themselves? So basically, if you buy a red Moby Glass, can you get red?
The short answer is yes and no. So yes, we will be able to do that, and basically we're looking at different ways that we can do different styling on the Moby Glass. The Moby Glass actually needs to be switched over to building blocks, and from there we will be doing a revamp on just the overall visuals of it, making sure that it's up to snuff. At that point, that's when I think a lot of the stuff that Zane and Bone have been working on, where we can actually switch out different styles. So it really is just almost like changing fonts in a word processing program. So at that point in time, we should be able to have different styles, and then that will also affect the text.
Yeah, we've talked about the upcoming Moby Glass revamp for a while now, just converting it over to building blocks, and then that's where all the customizations and stuff come in.
So right now the team's focusing on Star Map first, and then we'll go to Moby Glass.
Okay. Large ships. Large ships seem to be very difficult to fly straight and true in atmosphere. The nose tends to wander quite a bit. Is this intended, or should IFCS be doing more to fight the wind and air pressures?
I think there's two things there. There's some things we're looking at with how wind interacts with ships. That's causing some peculiar behaviour, but that's affecting all ships. Well, not equally, but relative to their size. So the big ships are probably less affected by it. And also, big ships are intentionally slower and harder to maneuver in atmosphere in 310, and that's a conscious design choice. Like big ships shouldn't be as good at getting everywhere as smaller ships. It gives you that trade-off as say a cargo runner with your big caterpillar. Do I just go to the orbital stops and dump my cargo there and then run it with a smaller ship? That's one way of doing it. Or do I take the risk and the time to go down to the surface, burn the extra fuel?
Yeah,
there's trade-offs for both. It's the larger ship handling is definitely getting towards the point where that's where we want it to be like.
Yeah, it's precisely the reason ships, many of the larger ships have parasite craft. It's been in the intention since the beginning there. It's like you have these parasite crafts, so those are your landing crafts and stuff like that. It's not to say that you can't take your big ship down. It's just that as weather gets more complex and the living conditions on planets become more complex and maybe more dangerous, we want people to have to make those choices instead of just having one ship that can go everywhere. It's now been a full quarter since prisons were first introduced. Are you happy with them and how they've affected the player experience? And how have they been adjusted, if at all, for 310?
Well, we'll start with the adjustments for 310. So we've adjusted some of the laws and kind of how punishing certain laws could be. So, for example, like accidentally bumping somebody or something like that shouldn't be a full crime anymore. So we've done those types of fixes, and then I'm happy with prisons as far as what kind of aspects of gameplay it's introducing, and where now there's punishment. Like if you want to do this, there's repercussions. And obviously, once we open a different system like Pyro or something like that, then the laws there will be different. So it allows different types of gameplay in Pyro. So that's the short answer. Yes, I've been happy with the changes that's been there. And then even just watching people do the escape runs and those types of things. There's still a lot more bugs that we've been dealing with and fixing. On basically the spawning of containers, as well as the changing of loadouts when you spawn and all of that stuff. So we still have bugs that we need to fix, but the overall feature and the mentality behind it, I'm happy with it.
So it sounds more like the adjustments are to the law system, to the things that get you into prison, making you less likely to go to prison for silly things is where we want to make the fixes.
That's the idea. That's the idea.
Oh, John, can you explain the thought process behind limiting targets to visual selection versus radar selection? At the time that this was done, this question came in on Monday, as you asked before. We can no longer cycle friendly or hostile targets on radar?
Yeah, so the new targeting thing has caused a lot of debate and feedback. We knew it would be a divisive change. So when we engineered the system, we put in, like, the guys working on it did a great job of just putting in options for everything. And over the last 2-3 weeks or so, we've been trialing out different combinations of all the options that we had available to us. So maybe at the time this question was written, it wasn't the case, but it is in. It probably was in the options menu, but unbound by default. And with either the build that went to PTU last night or the next one, it will be back in as a fully fledged option. The idea for it was really to just try and simplify the selection behavior, but the sort of unintended consequence of that was the less than ideal ability of selection on the 3D radar and the feedback that gave you, because moving everything to just being visual selection and using it from your head look to select everything, and the removal of the contact markers meant that people had been using the cycling keys as a sort of crutch, and once those were all gone, it was very clear how much they were in use. So it was bringing back our desire for that purely visual selection mode to work with cycling, and we've had tons and tons of iteration internally, and they've been going out as frequently as the PTU builds are. So I'm sorry to everyone who's been testing those builds and finding every patch has a completely different setup, but there's been so many options to try and sort of a limited amount of time to try the different combinations. But I think what we've got now is a pretty good mix of being able to look and lock and pin targets. So if you've got track IR or you're just using head look, you've got the ability to look at a target, lock it, pin it, or you can just use cycling, and that cycling does work for both everything on screen and around you.
Yeah, the ability for the pilot of a hammerhead to lock a target and pin a target and send those targets to the turret operators is awesome. I was playing with JJ again on Wednesday, and it was really helpful. It was very helpful because I'm not great at target identification as a turret gunner. Why does the ship's nose pitch up with takeoff?
It could be a lot of things. When you take off, there is this sort of stickiness on the landing gear that keeps you stuck to the ground, that you have to overcome with your vertical thrust. So I wouldn't say it's on every ship. Maybe it's on some in particular, especially Vtol ones where the Vtols aren't centered. So because it's fairly well simulated that if you've got, say, 4 landing gear and you're stuck to the floor and all your Vtol engines are at the back, say like the Cutlass, it's going to rip some of the landing gear off the floor before the others, and you'll end up with this sort of torque imbalance that you then have to correct. If it's extreme, it's almost certainly a bug. It's not intended to, like, every ship should do a 45-degree pitch up or down when you take off.
Okay.
But yeah, without more specifics, I can't say more.
And just to be clear, when you talk about the landing gear being sticky, that's a game thing to make sure your ships don't fly off the landing pad. That's not like there's not an digital adhesive. Or anything.
We're not got a glue stick going around sticking it. It's just to ensure some level of reliability when you land your ship and leave it. It's not going to slide down a mountain.
Gotcha. Have we considered an option to cancel takeoff or landing requests? Right now, players are having to wait for the timeout to go by in order to request it again. This has become more relevant now that the hangar doors tend to open and close very quickly after you make your requests.
The opening and closing is definitely a bug. I think is fixed now. I think that was fixed last night. Okay. So, like, especially problematic for the larger hangars or larger ships in larger hangars where the doors open and then closed immediately as soon as they're open. You didn't quite have enough time to get out. But the cancelling requests, definitely something we're looking at, as well as increasing the accessibility of that, rather than having to either go into your Moby Glass and call someone, or going into your MFDs and call them, making it a more direct action.
Okay.
Yeah, we know that the ATC needs to be cleaned up some, and so it's something that is on our radar, and basically we will get to it.
I'll leave it at that. How would we, Todd? How would you characterize the development of this patch? At this point, it is July 24th. The 310 patch is pretty late at this point. Was this work from home issues? Was this just this patch? What took extra time? How would you talk to me about the overall development of this patch at this point?
I don't think there's any work from home issues. I think after, probably, let's say easily the first month, everybody was kind of in the groove of what we needed to do. There were definitely certain aspects that took a little bit longer to get right, targeting restricted zones or two of them, and then even then there were some other bugs that we had to just deal with. And a lot of times what happens is that basically we'll be working on a build, and then all of a sudden, we get that build ready for Evocati. We get it out there, and then there's crashes, or there's deadlocks, or there's a lot of stuff that basically is keeping us from actually getting proper feedback. And so once we get those things stable, and we get, a more stable build, then that actually allows us to really start seeing those features and the positives and negatives of those features. So that's the way I feel about it. So, with targeting and restricted zones, like, we want to make sure targeting is right. It's a very, very important part of the game. So, and we want to make sure that we supported the team and that was working on it, and we gave them as much time as they needed to get it right. And I mean, John can attest to it. Like, every single morning, CR in our morning, every single morning, CR is sending notes and saying, "Hey guys, how's this? Let's look at it," so on and so forth. So, like, CR, this one has been very, very near and dear to CR's heart, to get it right. So, and so we just want to make sure the team, had enough time.
And I think all of us would rather spend the extra time making it right than just shoving it out and going, "Oh, it's the date, so here you go."
And by CR, you of course mean Chris Rain, the lead physics programmer.
Totally. Yeah.
No, so it's basically just sometimes these things take longer than other times to get right. It's you're creating something. It's hard to estimate how long it's going to take to smash bugs and fix issues and stuff like that. So it's just sometimes these things take longer. But I would agree with you that I think we've adapted to the work from home thing pretty good. This is just one of those patches at this point. Follow-up question. How does the late release of 310 impact the upcoming 311, 312?
So when the quarter ends, we already have plans, for every team and what they need to do, and all their upcoming sprints and so on and so forth. So as soon as that quarter ends, those teams actually start working on it. Now, if a live must fix bug comes in, or something that's, I feel like really needs to get fixed, or John feels like it really needs to get fixed, or any one of the other directors, then we pull somebody off to fix it, and then they go back to their sprint work. So it will really depend on the team, that is working on it. But for example, like, let's say we shipped 310 at the right at the beginning of July, and let's say targeting wasn't, working the way that we wanted it to work. That team would still be working on targeting, so it's not like we wouldn't just be putting it down saying, okay, it's good enough. We continue to work on it, and it basically adjust, other plans. So so in essence, it really depends on what team, is being affected. But for the most part, a lot of our bugs are just, somebody going in, recognizing, oh, that needs to be fixed, and they fix it, and then they go back to their feature work.
Okay. So different levels, basically. Some teams going to be affected more than others.
Yeah, and even then, if, for example, if it's a moderate bug or a trivial bug or something like that, like, we say, we take it on chin. We're like, okay, yeah, we're not going to fix it this patch. We'll move it to the next one, and basically we'll allow them to continue on their feature work, because we feel like that's more important versus a moderate bug or something like that.
Again, but each on its own case-by-case basis.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's. I just want to make sure that folks don't take that as a blanket statement. It's not saying that features are more important than bugs. It is on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, and the other thing is that we have a label that basically we call it gameplay experience. So anything that has a gameplay experience bug that is a trivial or a moderate or anything like that, I view those as extremely important, because they actually affect the way that the game plays. So, and basically QA flags those to me, and I go through and I basically am kind of the judge and jury on those. But I'll sit down and I'll review it, and I'll think about it, and then basically either assign the label or not assign the label. And then what we've asked the teams is try to work through as many of those bugs as they possibly can. And even when they're triaging bugs or working on bugs, throughout the quarter, they're still looking at those and viewing those as, yes, I need to fix those before we do another release.
Okay. John, changes to the flight model in 3.10 generally require more involvement all around. So folks have discovered that having to stop to go to the MFD or Moby has a little more consequence than it used to. Are we getting additional keybinds for things like requesting takeoff and landing and stuff like that to address this?
Yes, but not in 3.10. We're definitely looking at all those quality of life things like Todd mentioned with the gameplay experience label. These little bits that all add up to a less than ideal experience when you're playing the game, that compared to a feature aren't as much work, but do add just as much experience to the game.
Yeah, I think ATC keybinds would be appreciated, at least by me. Timing is. I haven't had this much trouble landing since the old Top Gun game on the NES. Nobody's going to know what I'm talking about there. All right. It's time for a Vanguard question, John. Is the poor handling of the Vanguard series at the moment intentional?
It was intentionally reduced from its 3.9 levels. And again, it's had another pass this week. So it was a little too harshly tuned down compared to 3.9. So it's had a little bump back up again. It's still a very effective fighter if you look at all the metrics for it. The Vanguard owners are caught in this weird cycle of they hate their ship, but it's an amazing ship to use and fight with, but they hate it.
They didn't specify here, but the handling, are they talking about atmospheric stuff, or are they talking about space as well?
Probably space. It was slightly a bit too sloppy in its rotations. It's the technical term.
All right. Is Vtol in 3.10 currently working as you'd hoped, or is there work left to be done? This person says they're a helicopter pilot, and it doesn't feel that great at the moment.
There's definitely some things we want to tweak, but where it is in 3.10 is probably where it's going to stay for 3.10. Everything else will be in the future. A common thing we've seen from helicopter pilots is asking for like a more collective way of controlling it. I'm not sure we'll go down that route, but certainly the behavior, I don't have my spaceship to hand, where people are expecting Vtol, and if they pitch forward for it to fly slightly forward is not quite that. It just sort of just strafes and does a weird thing. That's something we'll be looking at.
Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Can you define what the high-speed combat changes in 3.10 are and why?
Yep. So the two features of high-speed combat that we're releasing in 3.10 is the reduction in lock-on, or the increase in lock-on time for missiles when you're above SCM, and that scales depending on how far above your SCM speed. So if you're 1 meter a second over it, you're probably not going to notice the slowdown in your lock time for missiles. If you're doing 2,000 meters a second, it's going to be minutes to lock. And that's just a sort of, all of these ideas and implementations were there to disincentivize players from fighting at high speeds, because at higher speeds it just left the combat ranges got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and you just ended up pixel hunting. And we really wanted to bring those fights back in, and we've got some mid and long term plans that we'll go over in the future about bringing that in more, which sort of superseded some of our plans for high speed combat, which is why it's perhaps not quite as big as people were expecting for 3.10. The other thing that it does is it changes the auto gimbal slew rate when you're above SCM. So the speed it takes for your auto gimbal cursor to track over the target in the cone is slowed down again, scales. The faster you go, the harder that is. We had some other things that we tried, which was just a flat out weapon spread increase, but that it felt very artificial and weird to play with. We tried reducing the shield face strength, and that was sort of cool. It worked, but we didn't really have the UI reinforcement to explain what was going on there, so we didn't enable that in the patch because it ultimately just became confusing, and a lot of it was tied into the state of missiles and countermeasures. When your shields became weaker at speed and you were trying to run away, for example, without a way to effectively countermeasure missiles just became a one-click win for the person who wasn't running away, and we wanted there to be a lot more counterplay there. So for 3.10, it's just those first two bits. For 3.11 or later, we might do some more, but we have some other ideas that we want to try first. And that's all. High-speed combat is sort of the wrong term for it. It's more getting closer combats at lower speeds versus high-speed combat.
Yeah, probably, close combat improvements or something like that might have been a better term. And then, of course, I know we're talking about 3.10 here, but part of that continuing work that will continue beyond 3.10 is revisiting missiles and how they work and stuff like that.
Yeah, flares should work again in 3.10 now. We're looking at chaff. Chaff is a curious one. It's quite hard to use anyway, but we're going to try and squeeze a temporary fix in there, so at least those two work for 3.10.
Okay. In P2 right now, when a ship starts to roll, fixed weapons have some trouble hitting the target because the pip, if I remember when I was trying, the pip tends to go kind of crazy when you're doing the roll. Can you give us an idea about what's happening there? Am I crazy? Am I remembering this wrong?
You're not crazy about this one.
Okay.
It's pips can only be as good as what's given to them and how the network is performing at that time. So they're not a 100% guarantee of success if you hit them, because there's things outside of everyone's control that can get in the way there. And that's part of the reason fixed assist was put in, to sort of try and mitigate some of that fuzziness for when people are doing stuff like this. The best way to mitigate that is to just get closer, because there's just less chance of things to go wrong in between. That's really it. Right? Yogi would be a really good person to answer this more in depth, because he did a lot of changes for 3.10. I think we removed the acceleration off them for 3.10, which is causing a lot of that rubber banding effect that people were getting with pips. So they are more accurate, but they're now at the mercy of, like, if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out of the data.
From the chat here, with all the changes to the flight model, it's being geared towards combat and slowing things down. What are the knock-ons to racing? what are the knockouts to racing? But how do we slow combat down without and still enable racing?
It's a tricky one. It's a fine line, because certainly past history has shown that the faster things get, the better they are, because they're harder to hit. No matter how weak you make them, if you can get a bit of paper with 4 size 10 guns on it, you're going to win every fight because you'll hit first. So it is a fine line of letting racers be fast, but not allowing them to be so overgunned that they become the best. They become better combat ships than the dedicated combat ships. So we have to look at other ways. Like, maybe they're not technically the fastest on paper in a straight line, but they have the best handling. Maybe they can sustain more G in turns. Maybe they're better in atmosphere. All these little things we can add that, when you put them all together, make a nice handling, agile ship that isn't the de facto best combat ship.
Todd, I know a lot of the big ticket kind of future things, the buzzwords are things like the iCache and the persistence and the server meshing and stuff like that. When developing for today's game, where it doesn't have those features implemented, how much of a focus is placed on future proofing for when those things come online? Do we build today for knowing that's coming later on, or is this going to be all rework later down the line?
No. In fact, I mean, for example, like we've redone every single team had to redo like certain aspects of their code, for server meshing, like, just to make sure things worked. But those were pretty small tasks, and I think, at least my teams blasted through them, and I would say in about a week, so it wasn't like a huge painstaking thing. So, but with iCache, or the other aspect would be, let's say we know we're going to be redoing something, if we'll wait until like iCache is done and then we'll redo it. So we'll just in some cases we'll live with the pain, where we look at a system, we know we want it redone. But if we're working on a system now, we know, what iCache is going to be doing. We know what server mesh is going to be doing, and we're making sure that when we're building these systems, they work accordingly.
Right.
And they should work when that switch is flipped.
Yeah. Teams in every studio have been doing a lot of the pre-prep and work necessary for this when it comes online. That's not to say that there won't be, just like when OCS came on, and just like client side and server side, there'll be bugs, and we'll have to go back and fix things. But the teams have been working from they know this is coming, and they're doing everything that they know they can do now to prep for it.
Yeah.
Back to the targeting pips, John. Based on the version that's on P2 right now, are we planning any additional changes to the targeting pips before this rolls out? Or are we? I know you just talked about the networking stuff and everything, but as far as their format, how they look, the difference between the fixed and the gimbal stuff and stuff like this, are we? Is it where it needs to be, or are we still working?
The actual visual styling of them is pretty close to where we want them to be. There are a few things that we want to add, but it's not going to come for 310 because it requires some work from other teams, and that's adding or the ability to add drop shadow or dynamic brightness to those HUD elements, just so they work across all visual backgrounds. So something else that went into 310 was the actual HUD. The HUD UI on ships dynamically adjusts based on what's on screen. So if you're in the dark depths of space, it dims down so the eye adaptation doesn't get blown out. And then if you're facing a bright white planet, it brightens up so you can see it. But unfortunately, that only applies to things in the world, whereas these reticules and markers. They're sort of on your lens or in your visor, and that goes through a slightly different rendering path, so it can't use that system out the box, and we want that to be able to be used. So then everything HUD-wise will dynamically adapt in terms of brightness and visibility.
Okay. Can you please explain how proximity assist works?
Yep. So proximity assist is basically just looks around the ship in 6 different directions. It just does a very quick, simple, cheap raycast. And if there's something that it hits in that range, it then works out how much it needs to lower the acceleration of the ship to avoid, no, not to avoid it, but to give you a chance to correct yourself before you hit it. And then how much it drops off is just based on a design-driven curve. So it's not the same drop-off for every ship. We could make it not drop off at all for one ship if we wanted, or be insanely high for another.
Gotcha. So it's to help give you more time not to hit things, not to prevent you from hitting things.
Yeah. Like, if nothing's going to stop you as a player just holding down that button and crashing into things. If you want to do that, sure, do that. This is just for those situations where you haven't quite realized how close you are to a surface, and without any assist at all, you would just smash into it. This gives you those extra valuable half seconds to make a correction.
Todd, we've heard a lot of talk about bartenders. Bartenders are now making their way into Star Citizen with 310. Right now in the PTU, sometimes their performance takes quite a bit of hit. There's sometimes 10, 15, 20, 30 seconds delay between asking for something and then getting it. What can you tell us about what's happening? What's slowing that down right there?
So some of the stuff that we've seen is basically setup issues. And so with us going through and setting up each bar differently, and because each one is different, we have to go through and do a kind of initial setup of those things. So there's been in some cases, some animations have been set up wrong, or maybe there was a code bug or other things that were happening on the server, kind of thing. So over the past week, I mean, I think I've approved, I want to say about 20 different bug fixes just in bartenders, just going in. So it's something that the team's aware of, and they are focusing on making sure that it's as smooth as it possibly can be. I mean, we know that it's taken a while to get out there, but basically that vendor behavior was a bear.
Yeah, and just in general though, it's not because it's a bartender. It's bartenders are what they represent as far as what we want vendor behavior to be, for our NPCs. Talk a little bit about why this is important.
Well, I mean, there's basically use channel routing and the way that the bartenders, select what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. There's the menu system that's basically where we bring up the inner thought and how that connects into the stores. There's obviously the patrons and how they react to it. Then there's liquids and basically the pouring of liquids and making sure that stuff looks right. Then there's the way that the bartenders actually go in and out of usables and basically making sure that in the future it'll be motion matching that will help that. So there's a lot of intricacies that happen with basically the bartender as well as the bar patrons that have taken time to get right.
And the virtue of all that is that it's not just to make a bartender; it's to make our weapon vendors. It can be applied to vendors. I mean, aspects of that can be applied to mission givers at some point. I mean, it's NPCs, just these interactive.
It's vendors.
Vendors.
Yeah,
okay.
it's vendors. It's just vendors in general. But this was, basically we have a S42 rep. That basically, when we're developing these things, we're looking at what's needed in S42, what's needed in PU. So like there's correlation between both projects, on this thing, making sure it's done right.
Last bartender question. Now that we're getting them, can we get drunk?
Not yet. Basically, we have actor status 2.0, or the next version of actor status, which will have where you're dealing with radiation, or you're dealing with being able to be drunk or stems. But and then from there, we'll have. In the future, then we'll have diseases, and we'll have other aspects that the players will need to deal with. But at least for actor status 2.0, that's when you'll be able to get drunk.
All right. This next question is about the penguin plushies. Pico, is that what he's called? I think it's called
Pico the penguin.
Pico the penguin. Will the new penguin plushies persist inside of the captain's quarters of my ship?
They should. If they don't, then they will once iCache comes online.
Okay. And John, I've seen people use these things as all manner of cockpit decoration and stuff like this. Is this what you intended?
I had nothing to do with Pico.
That's Ian.
Yeah.
Ian loves his turtles and his stuffed animals.
He's got a thing for animals.
I was impressed to see it actually snowboarding down when people put it at the top of a hill on Microtech and it actually slid down. How are the temperature differences between night and day on a planet or moon calculated? Do they depend on the atmosphere, the distance to the star, or other factors?
So basically, when we do the initial calculations, it is based off of distance to the star, and then atmosphere. For example, like Aberdeen's really, really hot, and we know that that one was going to be very similar to Venus. So then we have what we consider a min-max, of basically the temperature at its hottest point and then at its coolest point, and then throughout the day it cycles through that.
And then the temperature has an impact on how ships handle an atmosphere, right, John?
The temperature doesn't currently.
Okay.
Well, handling-wise, it's purely just based off sort of pressure, air resistance, gravity. If temperature adjusts any of those things, then it will, by virtue of adjusting those three parameters, change the handling. What it will do in the future, though, is impact the items on the ship. So if you land your Carrack on Microtech in a storm and you turn everything off and you just go on an expedition for a couple hours, when you come back to your ship, it's going to be so cold that you can't just flick a switch and just take off immediately. You're going to have to sit there and let it warm up to operating temperatures before you can do anything. And the same's true for, say, Aberdeen. That's quite toasty. So you would expect your thrusters and your external items to start overheating a lot quicker than they would in space. And it will even go down to the extent of, again, using the Carrack. You land the Carrack on Aberdeen, open that front ramp, the heat from outside is going to start going into that front cargo area. If you just start opening doors between the two on the ship, the heat's going to start spreading through, and your life support on board is going to try and maintain that. But just like an air conditioner in real life, if you just open the front door of your house, your air conditioner is going to start trying to cool the outside of the house down and not do it well.
I could hear my mom asking if I was born in a barn right now. Todd, will there be a wipe with 310? And if so, will some people get wiped and others won't? Or that's the question.
I mean, we're still talking about it. If we do it, I think it'll probably be for everyone. But there's always considerations of what we'll do. As far as wiping, is there exploit or something like that we have? And right now we do have an exploit on PTU that we're fixing. But nothing that I can confirm at this moment. Just because we're still on wave 1, and once we get to wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, we'll basically start really talking about this. But right now, I don't. We'll wait to see. So.
Right. If it's resolved before we go live, for instance, it's like maybe it doesn't need to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. 310 has new electron damage for FPS weapons. What kind of situations do you imagine these would be ideal for?
In 310, it'll be killing. So.
Killing with lightning.
Yep.
Straight up killing.
Exactly. The whole idea about these things were just a way for us to introduce some new fun, types of Star Citizen style weapons, or weapons that we feel fit in our universe. So that was the first initial stab, and then from there, basically, we've adjusted our damage types. So electric is one of the ones that will actually kill, but then we've got stun and we've got distortion, which will obviously affect your ship, and it'll affect your components, but it won't do anything lethal to you. But stun will actually knock you out. So in the future, you could see these, electric type weapons as maybe tasers or non-lethal weapons that you can actually use for bounty hunting or whatever else you want to do.
We're almost out of time. Just a couple more here for you. John, players saw on ISC earlier that the M50 improvements, revisit, whatever it was going to have squared engines similar to the 300 series, but the version of the M50 that's currently on PTU does not have the squared engines. What happened there?
So we built both sets. When we were doing the M50 rework, we thought it'd be cool to see what it looked like with the modern Origin style sort of slatted engines. And ultimately, we presented both options to Chris. I was like, this one fits with the style guide, looks cool. And he was like, yep, looks cool. But here's the older style ones. And he was like, yeah, sure, they don't meet the style guide, but they look cooler, and that's what's there to start with. So let's keep them there. But in the future, we're probably going to we are going to enable you to swap out thruster sets, and so the M50 will almost certainly be the first one in a future patch that you can go to an in-game shop and square slatted style rear thrusters and put it on your M50 and have a slightly different handling and slightly different visuals, because we built both. It'd be a shame not to use them. I know some people really love the round engines, some people really love the slatted engines, so why not both?
Yeah, you're giving hope to 350 owners that they might get their round engines back at some point right now.
I'm not going as far as that.
Please do a meme of him with both.
Why not both?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not? No, but it's just another opportunity to remind everybody that when you see concept stuff in ISC, concept is our exploration phase. It is not an automatic that you see it and that's what's going into the game. That's why we put work in progress on everything in there. What else do we got? So 310's been in the works for a while. There's a lot going on between the flight model and all that stuff. For you guys, just speaking for yourself, I guess, what is the chat is asking? What is for you your best achievement for 310? What's the thing that you're either happiest about or most excited about or most grateful for? I don't know. Whichever one resonates.
For me, it's all the turret improvements. Which are a huge improvement over what was there in previous patches. And it really adds just a whole new level of multi-crew gameplay, because the turrets can now track things better, they can hit things better. You've got the pinning from the pilot, so you can coordinate. It's such a big change.
Yeah, seeing in Hammerhead turrets, seeing where every other turret is pointing on your screen and having the pilot be able to pin, it's a radically different experience when I played it, and I had a lot of fun with it. How about you, Todd?
I think there's the new UI going in, which is basically I work very closely with the UI team, so seeing that go in has been very beneficial for team morale as well as I think players enjoying it. Then basically there's the new stuff that we're doing with delivery. And I'm talking about teams that I deal with, you know. So I think those are two things that I'm very proud of, you know, for my teams. And then things that I deal with, you know, kind of on a secondary basis, it would be like, you know, us finishing off new Babbage, you know, and basically putting the factory line and being done with new Babbage now. So it's basically just one more thing done, you know, to the stand system, and now we go on to some of the big boys.
Yep.
So,
we'll be talking about those soon enough.
Yeah.
Todd, John, thank you so much for your time here on Star Citizen Live today. I always appreciate you at the end of a long week coming and, you know, facing the firing squad for an hour. Not always the most comfortable thing to do, so I always appreciate it when you do. For the folks watching, we are going to do, as we are wont to do now, our throw it to another Star Citizen streamer who is streaming right now. I am told it is Primal. Now, if I remember Primal correctly, they're a variety streamer and a 3D artist who often it's the kind of person we make those game dev streams for, who's really into the art of Star Citizen and how we do things. They do art streams of their own, showcasing how game artists create and stuff. Today, they should be playing in Alpha 3.10. So tell them that, let's see, what should we do? Tell them that John Crewe says Drake is the best. And for John, for Todd, for me, this has been Star Citizen Live, and we'll see you next week, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.